In Mark 9:44, the King James Bible reads, "Where their worm dieth not, and the fire is not quenched." The New International Version, in its 2011 edition, removes that verse entirely, not brackets it, not footnotes it, removes it. The same verse appears again at Mark 9:46, and the NIV removes that one too. Two warnings about eternal judgment, gone from the main text, in one of the best-selling Bibles in American church history. That is not a formatting decision. It is a manuscript decision, and it has doctrinal consequences for every reader who never opens a study note. Here is what this video does. 5 translations are going to stand trial for what they removed from the New Testament text. 3 are going to stand as the standard those 5 failed to meet. By the end, you will know exactly which manuscript tradition each decision follows, which publisher authorized it, and which Bibles on your shelf kept every verse intact. Number 5 presents a textbook case of how a translation can strip material from the New Testament while marketing itself as the most readable update in evangelical history. The New Living Translation, published by Tyndale House Publishers in 1996 as a full revision of Kenneth Taylor's 1971 Living Bible Paraphrase, retails for roughly $15 to $30 in its standard paperback edition. Tyndale positioned the NLT as a committee translation to separate it from the single-author paraphrase it replaced, and on paper, that is accurate. A translation committee did work on this text. The problem is what that committee chose to exclude. The NLT follows the modern critical text tradition, specifically drawing on the apparatus of the United Bible Society's Greek New Testament and the Nestle Aland 28th edition. That manuscript base excludes, or brackets, the longer ending of Mark, chapter 16, verses 9 through 20, relegating 12 verses of resurrection appearances and the Great Commission's final form to a separated textual note. It also omits Acts 8:37, the Ethiopian eunuch's confession of faith in Christ before baptism, a verse with direct relevance to baptismal theology and the public profession of faith. That verse simply does not appear in the NLT main text. Tyndale House is a privately held evangelical publisher founded to distribute Taylor's paraphrase at cost. Its commercial model has always prioritized accessibility, and the NLT's translation philosophy, described by the committee as optimal equivalence, leans toward readability when the two conflict. The result? You are not buying a translation that maximizes textual completeness. You are buying one that maximizes clarity at the cost of passages the manuscript tradition debate has not resolved in favor of omission. If the NLT's approach is a policy decision dressed as scholarship, the next entry on this list turns that policy into a brand identity. Number 4 takes the textual liberty further. The New International Version, in its 2011 revision published by Zondervan, retails between $20 and $40 in standard hardcover. What most buyers do not see on the cover is the ownership structure behind Zondervan. Zondervan was acquired by HarperCollins in 1988. HarperCollins is a subsidiary of News Corp, the media conglomerate built by Rupert Murdoch. When you purchase a 2011 NIV, a portion of that transaction flows through one of the largest secular media holding companies in the world. That context matters when you examine the translation decisions. Beyond the 2 omissions in Mark 9 already cited, the NIV 2011 removes or fully brackets Mark 16:9 through 20. John 7:53 through 8:11, the woman caught in adultery, and Acts 8:37. It also omits Romans 16:24, Matthew 17:21, Matthew 18:11, Mark 7:16, Mark 9:44, Mark 9:46, Mark 11:26, Luke 7:toista, kolme kymmentä, Luke 23, 7:toista, John vs. 4, and Acts 15:34. That is 11 verses removed from the main text in the New Testament alone, all following the critical text apparatus. The Committee on Bible Translation, which oversees the NIV, has never published a full public accounting of each decision with its textual rationale in a form accessible to the average reader. R.C. Sproul's Reformation Study Bible does not use the NIV. John MacArthur's pulpit and his seminary, the Master's Seminary, rely primarily on the NASB, and since 2021, the Legacy Standard Bible for exegetical work, despite the existence of a study edition that has carried his name in an NIV format. That divergence between pulpit practice and commercial endorsement is itself a data point worth noting. Verdict: you are paying for a global brand backed by secular media infrastructure, not for a committee that prioritized textual completeness over market reach. Number 3 extends this story into the academic and liturgical mainstream. The New Revised Standard Version, Updated Edition, published by the National Council of Churches and distributed by major academic presses, retails typically between $30 and $60 depending on edition. The NRSV has been the standard translation for mainline Protestant seminaries and Catholic academic institutions since its 1989 release, and the 2021 updated edition maintains that position. It also follows the critical text and makes the same cluster of omissions found in the NIV, while adding gender-inclusive language revisions that further distance the rendering from the formal structure of the Greek source. The Translation Committee drew from scholars across a wide ecumenical spectrum, which is a mark of genuine academic breadth. But breadth of representation did not produce breadth of textual inclusion. The longer ending of Mark, John 7:53 through 8:11, and Acts 8:37 are all separated from the main text, or formatted in ways that signal lesser textual authority to any reader paying attention. For Baptist and Reformed readers, the NRSV's combination of critical text base, gender-inclusive revision, and National Council of Churches oversight represents an alignment of institutional commitments that runs opposite to the conservative evangelical standard. The result: the premium price buys ecumenical credibility and academic pedigree, not textual completeness. Number 2 doubles down on what happens when a single human voice replaces a translation committee entirely. The Passion Translation, produced by Brian Simmons and published through Broad Street Publishing, retails between $18 and $35. Brian Simmons is listed as the sole translator. There is no committee. There is no peer review process that has been made public. Simmons has stated publicly that he received a personal visitation in which Jesus breathed on him and imparted a supernatural ability to translate the original languages. That claim is not a standard part of any academic translation methodology. The Passion Translation omits not just the disputed longer endings and interpolations, but restructures and expands individual verses in ways that do not correspond to the Greek text. John 1:1 The Passion Translation reads, "In the very beginning the living expression was already there." The Greek term logos, word, is replaced with a phrase Simmons coined. That is not a translation variant. That is an interpretive substitution with no manuscript basis. 50 evangelical scholars and theologians signed an open letter, published in 2020, raising concerns about the translation's accuracy and its departure from standard textual methodology. The Passion Translation has never been adopted by an accredited theological seminary for academic study. Verdict: you are buying a single author's charismatic interpretation packaged in Bible covers, not a translation of the New Testament. Before we reach the 3 translations that held the line, you need 4 tests. 4 things you can check before you buy any Bible that will separate a real translation from a commercial product dressed as one. First, open to the front matter and find the translation philosophy statement. Formal equivalence, also called essentially literal, means the translators worked word for word as closely as the target language allows. Dynamic equivalence, or thought for thought, means they prioritized how a sentence sounds in English over whether it matches the Greek or Hebrew structure. Paraphrase means one person's interpretation, not a translation committee's rendering. That statement tells you the methodology before you read a single verse. Second, go to 1 Timothy 3:16. If it reads, "God was manifest in the flesh," that translation follows the Textus Receptus, the manuscript tradition behind the King James and New King James. If it reads, "He appeared in the flesh," it follows the critical text, based primarily on Codex Sinaiticus and Codex Vaticanus. Neither tradition is automatically fraudulent, but the choice tells you exactly where the translation team's manuscript commitments lie, and it is a decision that carries doctrinal weight regarding the explicit affirmation of Christ's deity in that verse. Third, look for the translator list. A translation with serious committee accountability will list dozens, often more than 100, scholars from multiple denominations with their institutional affiliations. A paraphrase lists one name and a team of reviewers, who are not the same as translators. The ESV lists over 100 scholars. The Passion Translation lists Brian Simmons. Fourth, check whether the translation is used as a primary academic text in accredited seminaries. The NASB, ESV, KJV, and NKJV are all assigned in seminary exegesis courses. They have been subjected to academic scrutiny at a level that popular devotional translations and paraphrases have not. Every video on this channel applies these same tests. No publisher partnerships, no denominational sponsorships. If that is the kind of analysis you wish someone did before you bought your next Bible, you already know what to do. If these tests are saving you from your next bad Bible purchase, a like puts this in front of more believers who need it. Before we go further, drop your translation in the comments and defend it. Other believers watching this video read something different, and I want to see the debate. I read every reply. In second place, among the translations that held every verse intact, stands the New King James Version, published by Thomas Nelson in 1982, retailing between $25 and $55. Thomas Nelson is now part of HarperCollins Christian Publishing, the same corporate umbrella as Zondervan, which means the same News Corp ownership structure applies here. That is a fact worth naming. The commercial infrastructure behind the NKJV is identical to the one behind the NIV. What separates them is the manuscript choice. The NKJV was mandated by Thomas Nelson to retain the Textus Receptus as its underlying Greek base, matching the tradition of the King James Bible it was updating. That decision preserved Mark 16 to 9 through 20 inches. The main text kept Acts 8:37, retained the Trinitarian comma in 1 John 5 to 7, and maintained the full majority text tradition throughout. The committee of 130 scholars produced a translation that modernized the archaic language of the 1611 KJV, while making no cuts to the textual content. 1 Timothy 3:16 reads, "God was manifested in the flesh," preserving the explicit Christological statement. The NKJV carries a footnote system that marks critical text variants without removing them from the body of the translation. That is editorial transparency. The reader sees the debate in the notes, without losing the text in the main column. For the reader, the premium is paid for a modernized Textus Receptus tradition with full committee accountability, not for corporate branding. That is a meaningful distinction even inside a News Corp subsidiary. In third place, the New American Standard Bible, in its 1995 updated edition and its 2020 revision published by the Lockman Foundation, retails between $20 and $50. The Lockman Foundation is a nonprofit ministry organization based in La Habra, California. It holds no secular corporate parent. There are no shareholders pressing for market share optimization. The NASB was first published in 1960 by a committee whose stated goal was to produce the most accurate possible English rendering of the Hebrew and Old Testament text and the Greek New Testament. The NASB follows the critical text for its Greek base, which means it places the longer ending of Mark and John 7:53 through 8:11 inches, brackets with notation, rather than removing them entirely. That is a different posture than the NIV's clean omission. The text is present. The manuscript debate is visible. The 2020 LSB, the Legacy Standard Bible, produced by the Master's Seminary and published by 316 Publishing, is a direct descendant of the NASB tradition and represents the current state of that essentially literal methodology. But the 1995 NASB remains the seminary standard adopted in more accredited institutions than any other single translation over the last 4 decades. John MacArthur's pulpit exegesis and the curriculum at the Master's Seminary have been built on this text. Its rendering of 1 Timothy 3:16, "He who was revealed in the flesh," follows the critical text, which is the honest declaration of its manuscript base rather than a concealed editorial choice. Verdict. Here, translation philosophy is in honest alignment with committee composition and institutional accountability. Number 1 delivers a level of scholarship that stands alone in this category. The English Standard Version, published by Crossway in 2001 and revised most recently in 2016, retails between $20 and $60, depending on edition. Crossway is a ministry of Good News Publishers, a non-profit organization. Like the Lockman Foundation, it carries no secular corporate parent. Its publishing mandate is explicitly theological, not commercial. The ESV Translation Committee comprised more than 100 scholars drawn from over a dozen denominations, including Baptist, Presbyterian, Anglican, and Lutheran representation. The general editor was J.I. Packer. The committee worked from the Nestle Aland 27th edition Greek text and the Biblia Hebraica Stuttgartensia, with full documentation of its translation decisions in a publicly accessible preface and supplementary materials. The translation philosophy is formally equivalent, essentially literal, which means the committee prioritized word-for-word correspondence wherever the English could sustain it. The ESV retains Mark 16:9 through 20 inches. The main text, with a section header indicating the manuscript uncertainty, keeps John 7:53 through 8:11 with similar notation, and includes Acts 8:37 inches, a footnote tied to the main text location. The disputed verses are not hidden. The manuscript debate is surfaced for the reader. 1 Timothy 3:16 reads, "He was manifested in the flesh," following the critical text base while retaining the passage intact. The ESV has been adopted as the primary translation for exegetical courses at Reformed Theological Seminary, Covenant Theological Seminary, Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, and dozens of other accredited institutions. Since 2001, it has become the translation of record for the majority of the Reformed and confessional evangelical world. Wayne Grudem served on the Translation Oversight Committee. The royalty structure flows to Crossway's nonprofit mission, not to a secular media holding company. For the reader who has worked through this list, the ESV represents the rare case where price actually reflects committee work, manuscript transparency, and institutional accountability, rather than packaging or corporate overhead. The Full Truth Lens Handbook applies these same 4 tests to every translation on the market, with the verse comparisons laid out side by side. It is free. The link is in the description, and the QR code is right on your screen. Take a photo before we continue. Across the 5 translations that cut verses and the 3 that did not, one pattern stands out. The decision to remove a verse from the New Testament main text is never made by the Holy Spirit, and never made by a single scholar working alone in good faith. It is made by a committee operating under a manuscript philosophy, inside a publisher with a financial model, accountable to stakeholders that may or may not include the believing reader. Price does not predict fidelity. Corporate ownership does not guarantee corruption, but it does guarantee a conflict of interest that the nonprofit model avoids. What the manuscript base is, who chose it, and whether those scholars are named and accountable to the Academy, those 3 questions separate a translation from a commercial product wearing a Bible's cover. The reader who knows those questions cannot be sold a paraphrase as a translation or a deletion as a formatting choice. Every verse that was removed from the main text of the New Testament was removed by a human decision that can be traced, named, and evaluated. That is not a conspiracy. That is publishing. Know the difference before you buy. Subscribe, and the next Bible you buy will be one you examined first.